funny, you know, it's been a few years already and just starting to see what this car originally looked like when we got it and looking at these photos, it's pretty crazy, like the engine. Boy, you just look at the size of that double overhead cam and it sure does look like a kind of Coyote kind of took some of their ideas from this massive motor, and very, very similar. So we're gonna, you know, with using the Aston look, the Coyote's gonna work really well. It would have been nice to have an Aston V12 normally aspirated in it, but you know, we reached out and it just wasn't good timing for them. But you know, we look at this car and we, you know, not knowing what the Aston Martin really was, we just having him Google, you know, just a European muscle car, and for this car to show up, it's pretty cool. So we looked at it and said, God, well, you know, where would you change this car? So Gary and I and the guys, Jim and the guys, just looked at it and said, you know, it's super flat-sided. It's kind of boring, you know. You look at this car, it's just flat, but it does have a lot of cool things like the iconic scoop and the headlights and the bumpers, the way they wrap around the car. It's like really want to keep a lot of what was here, you know, the dual fillers. But then looking at the side again, you know, this back window, it just seemed out of place. The wing windows, I don't know, you look at this car, it seems really busy along the side with all the trim and the pillars going up. And then you look at the seat placements, like right in the middle of the door. It's like, that seems a little weird. But then you get into it and you realize why they did it. It's so it'd be easy to get into the back seat, and everything was kind of bunched up toward the front. So it was like, these are the things we look at and go, what would we do different? And that's a lot of it. But within our rendering, we wanted to retain the side scoop, the dual fuel fillers that are in these cars here. It's pretty cool, you know, you don't really see that so much. So wanted to retain that. We retain the shape of the glass. So it's fun, you know, to look at a car and say, what would you change? And us not knowing one thing about this car. These are just things we looked at instantly and said, we really need to put some hips into it, because Astons today are definitely hippie. So then we go into, you know, the renderings Gary did for it, which is super cool, taking the original car here, and then moving the wheelbase ahead, which we always do, getting the ride height, kind of showing where the wheels were, and picking out the tire size right away and building the car around that. So we went with 345 30 20s in the back and a 285 35 19 up front. Started with that, and you can see, pretty cool here is the original car in red. You can see how much wider we ended up going. So like from here to here, I believe is 5 inches. So 10 inches wider in the rear than factory. And up front, I believe it's 4 inches. So, you know, so it's significantly wider. And you can see the nose is a little longer and the back end of the car is a little longer. But now you can see what we mean. We put some shape in the car in the rendering. Some of the original front ends, though, we were looking at going, like this one was the original one. You can see how much wider. It looks more like the original car, but it felt it wasn't quite aggressive enough. So it went from that, you can see from the bumper up to the hood, to this one, which is much more pinched, and the lights are like hidden more, like coming out at you like Darth Vader or an evil villain, you know, a little bit squinty-eyed. So really like that. And if you looked at the original Aston fronts, they have a little of this going on. These intakes here on the original cars, we actually made them a little larger to make them more functional, because it is a supercharged car now. We actually went with the grill, with the opening a little larger to help cool this car. So that was the shape that we did. But again, the bumpers really retain a lot of what the original car was, where they wrap around. We did remove the front. We did change that more to this shape. It still comes around, but just a little bit more aggressive looking. So once we decided on, really the shape, we started going into alias and smoothing out. So it's really funny to look at a car with no door gaps and no lines, just trying to get it in the model and agreeing to what the car should kind of look like. Once we went through that, the taillight, different renderings of taillight design, thought, oh, a little Camaro-y. This car does look Camaro, 280Z, Mustang. Since it is kind of a muscle car from them, they had cues from all the cars. So it does have a resemblance of American muscle in a way. But you can see the side profile, how much cleaner it is with not all chopped up with different chrome pieces dividing the vent window from this window from the back window. Now, this shape, we want to take it for an air duct for the brakes. So change that. And you can see we wanted the glass to blend into the deck lid, which would be carbon, and then have a flow through here. So this spoiler actually floats across the top of both quarters. It's pretty cool. Won't really be recognizable. You look at it from the back, you really don't notice it, but if you do look right here, you'll see that it does come across. And again, this was another design that we had for the back end. So we landed on this, the finned one. Something to this effect, because that's what we really use throughout the car now. We use it here, we use it into the vents of the hood. And then these were some of the wheel ideas we had, which we really wanted to keep it similar to the original wheel. If you would go back and look at the real wheel, you'll see that the design we picked is very similar. So it's actually like this wheel, very similar, which kind of cool the way they had intakes almost for cooling the brakes way out here. The wheel was solid, so that's what we ended up doing, is filling this in, so it very much looks like the original wheel. Except for us, we wanted to have true pin drive wheels in this car, so we went with a Porsche 996. We scanned their stuff and then machined our own uprights so that we could run Porsche true pin drive wheels, Porsche factory lug nut pin drive, with a wheel that's very updated from the original version. So it's pretty fun. We didn't miss too much on this car as far as we wanted to keep retaining what this car was. So we go into the CAD, the original versions of, everything just chiseled, not radiused or anything. So then we're trying to build this car, right, without having the car. We originally de-skinned the 71, and as we were making the panels, like we started with the roof. Well, what ended up being was we changed the door profile so much that a lot of it wasn't going to work anymore. So we had to, then we realized that the inner shell of the original Aston wasn't going to work. It just wasn't going to do what we needed it to do. We couldn't just bond on like we had planned because we changed that shape so much. So we're like, okay, now how do we build to it? So we came up with doing a cage that was CNC'd to the shape of the car we needed. So all these points are very close to the original, to the new body shell that we're developing, so that we could build up this cage to hold our potato chip, as we say, without cracking it, bending it. So that's what we did. We ended up getting the quarters first with the roof and the deck lid and the taillight panel, and kind of screwed them together and set it over the top of this cage, and then built to it with the door jamb, because we had to build the jambs now. And we put all this together like this and set it over the top of that cage and then built off of that to hold everything exactly where we needed it. So you better be pretty square when you're starting this way, because we don't have the rest of the parts. We're like, oh man, if this thing's off a 1/4 inch back here, we're screwed up front. You know, rake, door jamb, how's the doors gonna fit then once we get them? How is the clamshell gonna work once we get to them? So it's pretty scary. So there was a lot of measuring to get this car where we needed it. And you can see in the red, after we did change some things. So we did have some interference. You can see that we ran into it. So we actually had to move these bars after they were made because of the door jamb. So we got ahead of ourselves again. So we had to move these bars inboard a little more. So it was all fixable, luckily, that we didn't have to change too much. But you can see where it did come through on our panels that we had made. So thank God we could adjust that without redoing that. So we did, and you can see we're going through, and these are hinges that we make. They were our Camaro hinge that we used in the model. So it's pretty cool. And you can see all the parts that we're designing here, making, fitting into the puzzle as we go. And then we get to the glass, because we knew, you know, we got to have glass made for this car. We didn't want to go plastic. So we had to figure out, okay, here's our glass. This is the size we need. As it comes down, you know, it's like, well, where is it going to hit first? Well, got to within a 1/2 inch right here. So we ended up bumping out, notching our glass. And then it's like, well, how do we hold that glass in a regulator? So we had to find a regulator that, you know, could go from the top to here to allow enough travel to get the window right down to this point, but yet not have it too long. So most of the regulators we found were way too long. I mean, to get it to come to glass to move all the way down. Sure. So we ended up with a Mustang regulator out of a newer Mustang, which worked really well, except Mustangs don't have an upper trim around them. So when you go to open them up, they drop. Well, that motor wouldn't work. So then we found motors out of a Ford truck that were just a 2-wire motor, which is what we needed to allow us to do what we needed. A big part of this was, most of the time latches are on the outside of a door. Well, the glass, the way it is, where it had to be, the latch had to be on the other side of the glass, which ran into, okay, now what? We only have so much room in here. So we ended up finding something out of a Cadillac that was narrower that we had to use for a latch, and we had to cut the opening deeper than where they normally have to go. So it was a challenge figuring out, okay, channel. Once we got that, then we had to have glass made, and we had to actually make the glass come down with holes in it, like a new regulator. They're holed in with holes that grab the regulator. So we had to design the glass to do that also. So quite a chore in just designing, you know, the glass in this car. And then we're still waiting on the glass to make sure that it fits, and then we can finish up the outer door panel, because we want to make sure we can adjust everything, get the glass working perfect before we go close it in, because it would be a lot harder to adjust things after that outer door panel is bonded on. Just going through, you look at all these parts we made, and rockers and door skins, and scanning, you know, the new Aston Martin door handles so that the opening is made exactly for the Aston Martin. And then it's like, okay, well then how do we hold it here? So then we had to build aluminum panel and bond it to the inside of this to hold the Aston Martin handle, because this is just like a potato chip. You know, it's just the opening with a return, but it has no way to hold the way the handles are bolted into this panel on a new car. So we had to come up with that on how to hold that handle. You look at the gas, you know, the fillers, the panels that this panel here is where the gas filler goes through. And then the deck lid goes to here. So all this carbon weave has to line up with the deck lid weave, and we angled it. So all this kind of had to be at the same time so that the weave lined up with the deck lid. Trying to think of everything ahead of time, as you can see right here. The weave has to line up with this weave of these cups, which this deck lid goes around this, but then it's got to line up here. And this is the back window. So, you know, thinking of all that ahead of time, and you can see the angle of the weave, because we just didn't want to have it, you know, it just looks nicer if you got, you know, on the hood and the back. And this weave also lines up with the taillight panel. And we actually changed direction of the weave right underneath the spoiler, so then the weave will go the opposite way and follow it around on the diffuser.
Oh, that's cool.
So we changed right on this lip, underneath here. We changed the direction of the weave. It's not an easy thing to do. They do make carbon weave that does that, but that's not what we do. We just actually have Chris cut it, and to make it like that is pretty tough. And then it's like you make the rockers, you know, these are other things you do. It's like, so you make the carbon rockers, well then how do you mount them? How do you figure out how to mount it on the chassis without really seeing anything? So a lot of this puzzle was trying to figure out, not just making this potato chip skin, is how do we mount it to this chassis without making it look like an afterthought? So there's a lot of head scratching on how to do that. Meaning the wheel tubs, you can see in our CAD here, there was no wheel tub. So we had to make the wheel tub fit and then bondable to the quarter panel. So it had to be precise so that it could be bonded to the quarter panels and not distort or raise the quarter panel while you're doing that. And again, you're doing that without the next piece in front of that piece. So you're looking at parts here. These are just pieces how the roof was. You know, that was the first part of the roof. Well, then we got to carry on the B-pillar and all that and hold this light panel without distorting it and making the glass fit. And yeah, so you can kind of get an understanding that it's a big deal. And it's got to be right. It can't be close. It's got to be right. And then figuring out, you know, like, okay, hinges, right? So these are our Camaro hinges that we have for a deck lid, because they're kind of neat hinge and we thought we could use them. Well, yeah, it fits here, it fits there, we can mount that. Well, it wasn't spinning fast enough not to hit the glass. It was coming backwards and hitting onto the spoiler. So we had to reshape all this, figure out this radius, so it would clear the glass going up, not hit the spoiler in the back, and then not go too far where the edge of this would hit onto the glass again. So there's a lot of thought and time figuring out. Actually did it with just TIG rod, figuring out that radius and how quick it had to turn just by bending that. So I mean, it wasn't even done in CAD. It was done just manually, old school. Again, you have two sides of the deck lid panel. You had the B side where this gets mounted on. Well, then you got to figure out, okay, what kind of latch we're going to use. We don't know. So we got this part figured out, right? Well, we don't know how this is. And I'm thinking, man, I remember the Corvettes, like the '06 Corvettes, which I'm not even sure what generation of it. That's C5 probably. And we used their latch assembly. So I went online, bought the latch assembly, and by golly, it worked out perfect. So we ended up using C6 Corvette latch in the back there. And you still, what's tricky is, get to the back of the car again. Okay, now we got the cage coming in here, and this and the taillight panel is raw carbon. So to paint this spoiler, once it's bonded together, to get underneath, this taillight panel cannot be in the car. Couldn't paint, couldn't get to it. So we got to make this panel removable. But there's already a cage that comes down here in the way. So we had to make that part removable. The cage, that part of the cage removable, so that after the car's painted is when we have to put this clear-coated carbon fiber taillight panel in. You know, we had to think of that. How are we going to get to that? We got a lot of stuff in our way, the lights and all that. So yeah. As you see here, that part is carbon. It's got to be put in after the whole car, all this spoiler's painted. And the same with the lower diffuser. This has got to be put in later. So figuring all that out, how we're gonna, what's in our way, but It's got to be put in after it's done. You know, it's a lot of head scratching going on here. So those are the things we had to hopefully think of as many of those things as we could. Since we're not done, as we're talking, I'm hoping we've figured a lot of this out. Just going through, and then the trim, you know, we machined all this trim we had to machine, and that's done. So we have to make sure all this lines up with our scoop. What's funny here is, so if you look, this scoop here is carbon. Well, so is the edge of this door, but it's got to line up perfect to this. So not only the weave's got to line up, the door, edge of the door has got to line up flush. Can't be sticking out. This trim's got to line up exactly here, so that means that door's got to be exactly with the scoop. So it's got to be right. There's just no room for error, because it's not like you can grind off these panels, you know, because they're raw carbon. They got to line up. Yeah, you could cut the metal and change it. You can't cut weaved carbon and put it back together and make it fit. So again, you go back to that taillight panel, and you know, that's got to go in after it's painted. So all that shape's got to be perfect shape, and then we got to come in through the trunk, around the cage, and set it in. These are, you know, this is the shape of the, you know, none of that trim is just straight. Look at the shape of that trim. So this is the back quarter piece, and then this is the door shape of that trim. It's not just a flat piece of aluminum that we could have made by hand and set onto the door. It's got to get wider and come around, and yeah. So for fixturing all that, that's a lot of head scratching too. It's just kind of fun to think of how far we've come already. Like, you look at this picture and you can see the original body, how much we moved the door, started to come away from the original body to make it wider. You know, it's not like it was all done through the clamshell. It was done all the way from the quarter, reshaped all that. And this kind of tells you how much, at this point already, we're getting wider. We're 2.5 inches wider on top of the door at this point, 1.5 inches here, and 1.75 inches on the bottom of that, where we're already starting to widen this car. It's just fun to look at this and just go, wow, you know, this is what we've done. The inner door panel here. Again, figuring out all the latches, all the regulators, all the hinge points, how we mount it. What do we do inside here, right? So you got just this carbon shell, and it's like, okay, that's a shell, that's great, but how do you put a beam in here, right? We had to put a beam in here for impact, and we have to build all the structure for the latch. So we had to line this with steel all the way around to give the strength, because that's just carbon. You go to shut the door, the top would. So we had to inlay steel all around here, all around the top, so that when you go to shut the door, that doesn't just bow out, you know, because you got a rubber seal there. So if it was just carbon, it would push out. It wouldn't be a tight seal, nor would this line up to the quarter, because it would flex too much at the top. So it's all got to be lined with steel, you know. And honestly, we didn't realize that going into it. It's just things that we figured out as we were doing it, like, oh man, that's going to flex. What are we going to do? This wasn't even done yet. So what we ended up realizing, when the glass come down, it was like wanting to protrude through this area. So we had to notch the carbon, make the carbon come out, and then the hinge bumped off this bump here to allow the glass to come in through that plane to give us more room, because we knew we would need more room on the front of that glass, since it was covering the wing window and not having a flag. If this angle here was steeper, that means that window would have had to come down in a greater angle, which means, like on a new car, a lot of times it can't, right? This window comes down, the window would have went through the door. So if this angle was much steeper, when we brought this glass down, it would have protruded through the door. So what new cars do, they'll put what's called a flag, and they mount a mirror off of this area, which allows that glass then to come more straight down and leaves them room inside the door. Because as it comes down in an angle, all based off of this angle here. So with not wanting that, not wanting a flag would have made the car too modern, we felt. We had to actually open this up on the inside door panel to allow this glass to protrude so that we could get enough bite on this glass. You got to have something for the channel that you put in here to ride on. And you can't just have a point, it would just tip. So thinking of all that, there's a lot of that you had to think of ahead of time. So we had to make sure this tub was large enough that it would clear the tire in all the positions. And that's got to line up, this upper wheel tub has to line up with the lower tub that we're making, and only have like a 1/2 inch gap so our rubber seal can squeeze and tighten against the lower wheel tub. It's just crazy to me, normally, and you can see right here, this is the upper wheel tub squishing against the other black is the lower wheel tub. So this part here is what gets bonded to, and that's a separate part, both sides, that get bonded to the inner skin of the clamshell hood. This is the lower wheel tub, which is not done yet in this position where we haven't notched it out yet around the A-arms and the control arms. But this is just the upper part and how it's going to have to seal against the lower part. That's all we were trying to figure out at this point. Kind of another cool thing is this is the airbox placement. It's pretty cool here. It kind of shows, okay, this is where the airbox has to be to line up to the hood scoop that we have. We want the air filter to sit right here, and we want it centered in the hood because the hood scoop is centered. So if you go back to the motor, this is a scan of the supercharger. You can see that this intake tube to the supercharger is offset for like Mustangs to the Coyotes. So what we had to do, and this is the pulley for the supercharger. So then what we had to have Harrop do, supercharger, is center this, meaning we have to then build this higher to go over this blower pulley and line up. So we gave them this, like, we got to get to here. So they had to rebuild, and it still is not done. They're machining a new intake, and then the throttle body gets put on here, but it'll always centered to line up with our hoods so that we can attach this air filter element box to line up to seal against our hood. All in space, all in CAD, and that's not done yet. That's what we're trying to figure out yet. So all this is just, crazy things we're thinking of as we go. And I'm just touching on it because it's just kind of bringing up to me as we're going through this. And, it doesn't even talk about what we had to do to line up the back end, the cage, how to get the rear bumper to line up, the exhaust tips we made, the way we had to run the exhaust through to get to where these are, just looking at things again. This is the side scoop, right? But then we had to print these ducts to take it down into the wheel tub to line up for the brakes. Very complicated part. This is the outer part of the hood, but this vent actually goes underneath the A side of the hood. So this scoop is part of the outer. It looks like it's part of the inner, but it's part of the outer. This part here, to make it, and to paint the bottom here, and to do this has got to be a separate piece and then bonded in later to the A side of the hood. So this scoop is A side. This is supposed to be A side, but it can't be because we couldn't make it that way and get it in. So it's just crazy. So this is actually a B side part that we put in separate. Again, this is the upper wheel tub. That's the finished part. This is what gets bonded to the upper part of the hood, the inner of the hood, and this flange on the bottom here is what seals against the rubber seal, and this is the inner fender. And you look how crazy a shape this is, All that's notched out for the control arms. All this is notched out for all the work we've done already. how it comes in and reshapes down, seals against. This goes forward. It's just crazy. Will be done in exposed carbon. You can kind of see here what it'll look like against our brake booster and everything. See how that wraps around, goes around the control arm. Here's the top seal. This is the front of the car, obviously, and this is how it's got to get around the booster. Working with Gentex on the mirror, so we come up with a mirror design. This is our mirror design. The top part will be carbon. And believe it or not, it's the same shape as the original. Even though those are just the profile shape of this is the same shape that the original shape of the rear view mirror on the 71 was. Even though it's teardropped more and all that, but the face shape, if you looked at it, would be the same shape as the original mirror. And then going into like the grille here, the shape of the grille, again, we had to come up with projector lights. How do we mount them? How do we make them fit into the grille? How do we get the hinging to go through that grille portion that we need? So a lot of head scratching. We decided we're gonna have to make these bars removable. We wouldn't be able to make that grille with all these, but we want them exposed carbon, so they gotta be weaved, angled, done separate. So those are separate pieces. We wanted to dress up the engine bay too. So we made this bracing, or it's not, we don't have it yet, but you see this structure? This is a carbon brace that comes around the back of the motor, comes forward and ties in to the frame rail. So it'll be a pretty cool piece that surrounds the engine with a carbon brace. And the airbox sits in the middle, and then there will be a closeout panel right here that closes all this off. It'll come across, close out top of the radiator, and that'll be a carbon. So I truly believe that one of the most spectacular parts of this car will be under the hood. Yeah. And then we're wanting to dress up this motor to look like, because these motors, if you remember looking back, Coyotes are very similar to the 5.2 that was in this car. So we're actually cutting out the original Aston Martin logos out of the original and gonna weld them into the Coyote valve cover. So it'll retain the original signage from the original motor. You can see like what the grille would be as one piece. This is the shape of the grille from the backside. Figuring out how we're mounting all our stuff, so. Pretty cool. I mean, this is where we're at today with the CAD. And you can see we're looking from inspiration from the Aston Martin, you know, the inner wheel tubs, how they sealed. This one, their airbox was off here. This was their latch system. Ours is different. But, you know, again, we had to think of all that. To think so far we pulled it off. We've only got 4 months to finish it. So that's where we're at right now. We'll keep adding to the CAD and showing you more later on.